Hello class, welcome to this recording for Chapter 13. So we're going to do a brief review of the PowerPoints. It won't be as long as a normal course, but I'm going to review the PowerPoints and then I'll provide a separate video that's going to review the problems that you have. So this Chapter 13 is all about long-term liabilities, meaning obligations that you have to pay for more than a year. So that's the general idea of a long-term liability. We have a fairly long discussion this week, but it's got a lot of detail in it. I guess the general idea of this is that we have Donald, who's the CEO, and he also owns 51% of the company, so he's the owner and manager. And then we have Nina, who owns a substantial amount too. She owns 40%. They have different ideas of what they want to do going forward. So Donald's got more of a long-term plan where he's looking at using debt to finance the company, finance their long-term strategy, whereas Nina is looking at more of a short-term plan and looking at she prefer to use equity. Now remember, Nina is not a manager, she just owns stock. So Donald is actually the manager and runs the company, but Nina has her 2 cents that she wants to put in there. And she's saying that she wants something to focus on short-term initiatives that would bring up the value of the stock. And so by selling more stock, she would also have the opportunity to maybe take over the company. Who knows? But the idea is, here's the idea for this. The idea is for you to determine the pros and cons or strengths and weaknesses of debt of debt financing, in other words, financing with bonds and loans, or using equity financing, meaning selling investment in the company, like selling stock in the company. There's pros and cons to each way, and that's really the focus of this. So make sure you look at the pros and cons of each option for obtaining financing. Let's go ahead and look at long-term obligations. So we have two general long-term obligations that we're going to focus on. The first one is a note payable, which is basically a loan. And so the loan is from a single lender, meaning a bank. So if you get all your money from a bank, well, sometimes companies need to have more financing than that they can get from a single source. And so they'll issue out bonds. So a bond is a loan too, but a bond is a bunch of loans that they offer to the investing public, and they can basically lend the company money. And so if you were one of these individuals and you bought some bonds, then they would pay you back with interest. And so the difference though is that when you look at the risk under a typical loan, the risk is determined at the time the loan is created, and so the interest rate reflects the risk. But with a bond, they create the bond, but it could take months for the bond to sell, and so in the meantime, the risk can change. But the bond's interest is always going to be based on when it was created, not when it was sold. And so that difference between the risk when it was created and the risk in which it's sold create some challenges for us that we're going to focus on. Here's a lot of different concepts and terminology associated with bonds. I'm not going to go through them, but I think you should go through and just kind of read through these, because you can easily read through this stuff and understand it, but it's important definitions that are going to help you by knowing what the definition means. So the selling price or stated amount on the bond is the amount that the bond shows. So if the bond shows that they're going to pay you back $1,000 or $100,000, whatever the bond states, that's going to be the amount. And then the risk that's created when the time the bond is made is stated or put on the actual bond itself. And this is the amount of interest payments they're going to pay you. This is the cash amount they're going to pay you as interest. These are the amounts that are on the bond when the bond is created. However, later on the bond is sold, and that can result in differences between the risk when it was created and when it was sold. This creates an effective rate. So let's see what that means exactly. Let's say situation number one, the bond is created and there's 4% interest rate because that's what they deem the risk to be at the time. But then later on when the bond is actually sold, the market says, you know what, this company is more risky and so we want more interest. However, the company cannot pay more interest. And so what they do to fix that is they sell the bond for less, and that effectively creates a higher interest amount because the bond is sold for less, but it's paying the same amount of money and the same percentage. And so that means the bond is sold at a discount. If the interest decreases because the market sees a lower risk, then the market's going to still get the same 4%. They're going to get more than they want, and so they're going to effectively deal with that by bidding the bond up and paying a premium because the bond is paying more than they need from interest. The risk is less than the bond was initially, and so by paying a premium, they effectively adjust the interest at the beginning. So this is kind of a cool way that they can adjust the interest from the stated rate at the time it's sold, even though the risk may have changed. We'll have to see how that's calculated. So let's look at this bond. $100,000 bond. It's due in 5 years. It's a 9% on the bond, but it's paying 11. That means the risk of the company has gone up. That means they're going to have to sell it at a discount. So if you go back into Intermediate 1, we did the present value calculations. This is where you were first introduced to this. You do the present value of the principal of the bond, the $100,000, using the 11%. You use the effective rate. And then you do the present value of the payments. Now the payments are going to be based on the amount on the bond. So the payments are based on 9%, but the present value of the annuity of those payments is going to be based on the 11%. So you use the 9%, but then when you do the present value, you use the 11%. Those two add up, and see how it's less? That's the discount. So this is the discount because the bond's paying less than the market wants. So then if you were to put this on a journal entry, you put the cash that you receive, the discount's the difference, and then this is what you're going to pay back as far as the bond when it's time for it to when it completes, when the bond is paid back at the end of the time. So this is the journal entry. Now here's the deal. The discount needs to be spread out over the life of the bond because this discount represents a form of an interest adjustment. And so as time progresses, that's why it needs to be adjusted. So one method we can use is the straight line method. And so just like the depreciation method of straight line, you just divide by the number of periods. So since this is a 10-year bond paying twice a year, you just take the amount and you divide by 20. And so every period, the straight line method is going to discount. It's going to adjust the discount by the same amount. So notice the debit, and then we're going to whittle it down by the same amount, 1200, 1200 as a credit every single time until that discount is fully amortized. That's the straight line method. If you were doing this as a premium, the premium would end up being a credit and your amortization amounts would be the other way. So here's a premium example. So your premium would be a credit and then your amortization amounts would be debits because that's going to reduce it. And it's a straight line method, so straight line method means the same amount. The effective method is the other way to amortize. It's a little bit more complicated, but it actually represents the time value more closely. So it's actually more often used because of the way it more accurately gives a representation of the amortization over time. So you don't have to worry about this, but just we end up with a bond with a discount, and we want to see how we're going to amortize that using the effective rate. So it's a $100,000 8% bond, but the effective interest is 10%. So since the market wants effectively more than it's paying, we have a discount, we're going to sell it for less. So here's our amortization table. Now, you can easily create this in Excel, and it does great to do that. So you start out with your carrying value, and you're going to end up with your carrying value equaling the face value. So when you have a discount, that means that every time your carrying value is adjusted, it's going to go up. So the amount that the bond pays is always going to be the same, $4,000. It's based on the face of the bond. So 8% bond paying twice a year on $100,000 gives you $4,000. That will never change. But the interest expense will change. The interest expense is based on the yield, the effective rate. 10% over twice a year means 5%. So take the carrying amount, $92,278 times 5%. Then you compare the two and you see that the difference is $614, and that's what you add to the carrying amount. So you add it because you want it to increase until it gets to the face value at the end. The next period, you take the new carrying amount, $92,892, multiply it by the 5%, and now you have a new amortization. And so every time you do the calculation, your amortization is going to slightly change, and it's going to be increasing, and it's going to bring your carrying value up to equal the face value. When you do the journal entries, they're the same journal entries, but the amounts are going to be based off of that schedule. So 614, 645, that's going to be your amortized amount, 614, 645, with the original discount being a debit, and then your later credits being based on the table. When you look on the balance sheet, then you're going to take your the bond's face value, and then you're going to put whatever discount is left that hasn't been amortized, and that's going to give you your carrying value as of that particular point in time. And if you go back and you look at the 2025, you got 92,892, and that's, well, let's see, 93,537, because that was halfway through the year. So at the end of the year, it's 93,537, and that's where we get the balance sheet amount that we're going to present. Okay. What if you have a premium? So in this case, again, you can look through the calculations later, but the premium means that the bond is selling for more than the face value. So how are we going to deal with that? Well, the carrying value is going to be higher than the face value, so that means every time you do the calculation, you're actually going to go down. So you're going to subtract the amortization. The calculation is very much the same. I mean, $4,000. The interest rate is based off of 6% twice a year, so 3%. So take 3% of the carrying value. That gives you $3,256. The difference gives you your amount that you're going to amortize, but now instead of adding it, you subtract it, and subtracting it every time until you get to the face value. So the next period, you're going to take 3% of the new carrying value and then take the difference, and so it's slightly different amortization amount. It's not like straight line, it's going to always change, but you're going to, with the discount, you're going to add it back. That basically covers the key areas for this chapter, especially for the parts that are going to help us with the homework. We'll look at those in a different video.